to Active Travel Cafe for the 6th of January 2026. Happy New Year. I'm Robin Tucker, based in Oxfordshire, and very keen to have a session tonight with Andrew Read and Nick Davies, who'll be talking about the GM Ringway, the Greater Manchester Ringway, and leisure walking as a driver of active travel and well-being. And they'll be talking about some of the lessons learned from Greater Manchester's new walking trail. So we're looking forward to that. First of all, we'll start off as ever with news from around the country and maybe around the world sometimes. So first of all, I know Bob Davis was keen to talk about the road safety strategy, which news was breaking during the day that it's going to be announced tomorrow. Bob is a long time advocate for this story, and is probably ahead of us on the news. So please fire away, Bob.
Hi, people. Yes, it's the launch of the road safety strategy, which is coming tomorrow. It was due to come last spring, and like so many things, been delayed. What I've heard of it so far is that it's pretty dreadful. As you know, I represent the Road Danger Reduction Forum. We believe in looking at measuring danger in ways which are different from the Department for Transport. It is possible to reduce overall road casualties by not having people walking and cycling about. And that's not the view we take, and I hope not the view that anybody listening today takes. But they don't seem to have changed their way of looking at that. What we know so far is that there is more or less nothing good coming through, and the kind of things that we'd like to see, alternative ways, metrics of measuring danger, and so on, don't seem to be on the agenda. The most of what's hit the news is that 70-year-olds are going to have an eyesight test. Now, I mean, in a sense, this really tells you the whole story, because you are legally required to be able to see where you're going. There are about 600, 700,000 motorists who can't pass the very simple 20-meter reading of number plate test. And of course, you could just have policing, which would deal with that by banning people who can't see where they're going. That doesn't seem to be on the agenda. All that's happening for the 70-year-olds is that you have to declare that you've had an eyesight test when you declare that you're okay to carry on driving. It's just, something you say yourself. There's no question of retesting or dealing with the argument about ageism by having regular retesting for everybody. Just that thing about the compulsory eyesight test. The graduated driver licensing for young drivers who are a particular problem doesn't seem to be coming through. I haven't seen anything about speeding. It's nothing about policing. We're strong believers in policing, even the AA is. That doesn't seem to be on the cards. Traffic justice, having appropriate penalties for people who've hurt or killed people on the road, doesn't seem to be coming through. I don't know about any recommendations about speed control, speed limits, odd bits and pieces, like making it a bit easier to give penalty points to people not wearing seatbelts. But for active travel, I can't really see anything, and it does seem to fit in with the agenda of a government which is passionate about increasing the numbers of people driving cars, vans and lorries by spending billions on new roads and nothing much on active travel. Anyway, so a bit depressed about that, but do watch out for it tomorrow. And if your organisation wants to make some comments about how you're disappointed, do think of doing that. And also you can contact us, RDRF, in case we can round up a few other organisations to dish out a press release.
Okay, Bob, thank you for that somewhat...
Sorry, it's depressing, but there you go.
Yeah, I don't think any of us were expecting it to solve all the problems, but that pretty much aligns with my expectations for it, which were
Uh-huh.
fairly dismal. Mark, are you going to cheer us up?
Maybe not, but in the
Probably not.
spirit of checking everything out on the first day of back, or second or first week back, the government's also launched its draft micromobility, personal electric transporter, I think it's called, draft strategy, which literally came out like 3 o'clock today. I put it on the news of the chat. I haven't even read it yet, but I do notice that Kate Ball said it's been done in conjunction with Wheels for Wellbeing. So hopefully it's going to be better reading and slightly less depressing than what Bob's just been referring to.
Okay.
So please read and consult by the end of March. Respond by the end of March.
We've got a bit of time to work on that one, so I look forward to discussions on various WhatsApp groups. Maybe we'll come back to that in a week's time when people have had a chance to read it and get some views on that. Any other news and views?
Robin?
Yes.
I can't put my hand up.
Sally. No, you can't.
It is. Sorry. I've just noticed that somebody from Playing Out has joined, and they'll have missed the beginning of the news, but I know that they have a big event coming up that they might like to share some information about. I don't know who it is that's joined.
Hi, Sally, it's me.
It's Alice. Hello.
Hi. I was hoping to join covertly. Not very well.
You've been called out in a positive way.
Yeah, but anyway, yeah, we've got a big, and we're ending Playing Out as an organisation at the end of March because we've sort of done as much as we feel we can do, and we've started this whole conversation about children's freedom and rights in the built environment, and other people are now talking about it, and we feel like the movement can kind of carry on without us, hopefully, as an organisation. And one of the things that we want to do before we finish is have a big gathering of anyone that is up for trying to take this work forward, make streets better and safer for children. So it's 12th of March, Bristol City Hall. It's free for anyone that needs it to be free, and it's only 50 quid for anyone that can afford to pay 50 quid to chip in. And I will put a link in the chat. Is that enough, Sally, to say about it?
Thank you. Yeah, I've put the link in the chat for you, but
yeah, it should be a fun conference.
Just when I saw you, it reminded me that I was going to share that anyway.
Great, thanks you.
Alice.
Okay. Any others? I'll go with a couple that I'm fairly sure that people will have seen because they're national news, but I think they came after our last session. Somebody will shout if I've got my timings wrong and they've been discussed here before. But one is the active travel capability ratings and the fundings for the next 3 years, so for local authorities outside the major metro areas. So that's quite important for us in the shires. I think the news was that quite a few counties, including Oxfordshire, went up from level 2 to level 3 on what's a 5-point scale with level 4 at the top. So that's quite good news for us. And one authority, I can't remember which one it was now, went down a place, which is the first time I think we know that that's happened. The funding is locked in now for 3 years on the basis of that, which gives authorities a bit more certainty, which is good. And then Active Travel England has launched a new tool, which some of us saw at the conference in York last year in July, the connectivity tool, which gives a rating for any location in the country of how well it is connected by walking, cycling and public transport. And you can switch it to a driving mode if you really want to, with different types of destinations such as education, leisure, health, shopping, residential, workplaces. all at once, or you can switch it to individually. And it gives you a numerical score, and you can quite easily see the difference between urban places and rural places, and then you can drill in to look at more subtleties on a local level. And there's a light version which anybody can use without registration, and there's a full-on version which you have to register for. It's intended for transport professionals and local people in local authorities, where you can set up a new bus route, and for example, and see how much difference it makes. So that's called the connectivity tool, and it's lurking somewhere on the Active Travel England website, and looks as if it could be quite a useful tool for certain applications. I thought I would mention that. Any other news before we go on to our presentation for the day? No? Right, in which case, Andrew and Nick, please take it over.
Yep, certainly. I'm just opening the screen for you, sharing the screen. Here we go. And we'll just get that onto the full screen. Great to see such a lovely big audience here. We're really happy to be talking, especially about walking, as I know lots of the sessions are often on cycling. So this is specifically on walking, but we'll also have relevance for cycling, wheeling, and public transport as well. Just to introduce us, I'm Dr. Andrew Read. I'm an independent consultant at the moment working for Walking Projects Plus. Later this month, I will be working for one of the organisations that's regular attendees of Active Travel, but more news on that when it comes. Over to you, Nick.
Yeah, hi. Same as Andrew, it's really great to be here and be able to present to you. My name's Nick Davies, and I'm a researcher at Glasgow Caledonian University. I'm interested in walking, and you'll see some initial findings really from the research here.
Yeah, so sorry, just to go back a bit. Yeah, we're talking particularly about how leisure walking can actually boost active travel and well-being, and have all sorts of other impacts on the regions where walking and cycling trails are established. Specifically, we'll be talking about the importance of, Nick will talk about walking research generally. I'll be introducing the GM Ringway. It was a project that I spearheaded originally and then has been implemented over the last few years. We're looking at the relationship between trails and active travel, because they're not quite the same thing. And then we'll be looking at impacts, particularly focusing on the brand new survey results you've got. You are the first audience to hear our results of our brand new user survey. And we'll finish off with benefits of trails for the regions where they're established. Okay, so Nick, over to you.
Yeah, okay, so not to really dwell on this, because we all know walking is a good thing. We all know it's good for health and well-being, and reducing carbon as well, and social impacts, etc. And there's also a lot of academic and non-academic research to prove that. Where we're particularly interested in is, as Andrew kind of alluded to, some of the different contexts of walking. So a walking trail quite often is a place where you will go to do a walk as such, a planned walk maybe. Same as a national park, same as many other destinations, whereas sometimes we're also interested in how walking can replace a short car trip, and that can be something slightly different. So we're really interested in kind of how all of that plays out when you have a large walking trail within a very urban area with a large population. And we'll get into some of the results and how we research that in a second, but really just to make that point, that when we talk about those planned walks, quite often when we think about a very populous area, a lot of people will think about going to somewhere which is quite a long way away, like a national park, and taking a car. So we want to be understanding how particularly an urban trail, a near urban trail, can actually maybe offset some of that carbon which is associated with those walking trips. I'm not going to really say much else about the evidence base because time's limited, so I'm going to just hand back over to Andrew, and then we'll talk about research shortly.
Great. What I'll do next, though, is explain what the GM Ringway is. I know I think this Active Travel Cafe was first started in the Northwest, so some of you will be local, so you might know about the trail already. But basically, it was just originally my idea, just as an independent citizen. I had walked lots of other walking trails elsewhere in the country, and I was inspired by those. Could see how wonderful it is to walk in, lovely places, take you to heritage sites as well. And I realised that in Greater Manchester, where I've lived for many, many years, we have all sorts of very varied scenery, very interesting heritage attractions, but importantly as well, a quite comprehensive public transport network that sort of branches out from central Manchester, trams, trains and bus routes. And my notion was and this has basically stayed all the way through the course and through implementation, to create a trail that links the green spaces and heritage sites based around the public transport network. So the trail is designed, as you can see on the map here, so that each of the 20 stages, starting in central Manchester and going through all 10 boroughs, each stage of the 20 stages starts and finishes at a easily accessible public transport spot, which opens it out to lots of citizens and of course has environmental benefits in its own right. After basically I got involved, Greater Manchester's always been very supportive at sort of official level, but we didn't sort of fit any funding pots, doesn't fit active travel or environmental interventions specifically. But working with two charities, CPRE, the Countryside Charity, and the Ramblers, we basically bid for Heritage Fund money. We won a £250,000 Heritage Fund grant, and then we're basically able to top it up with about 50,000 of other smaller grants as well, and then implemented the project with me as project lead. Lots of support from Nick in the background and other experts over the period from 2022 to 2024. The resource is now very popular. We get fantastic feedback about it, and the research will tell you more. I just want to explain, I think this will be very useful for this audience, how a walking trail, using the specific example of the GM Ringway, might differ and relate to active travel schemes. So unlike active travel schemes, a leisure trail will tend to be used for different times and different purposes than utility routes. You'll get much more weekend use, for example, use probably more in the spring and summer and autumn rather than during the winter. That may be true for active travel as well. But the sort of times that people will walk, obviously you won't get so much use in rush hours, that kind of thing. Also, a trail like this can be developed using existing paths rather than new infrastructure, which makes it easier in some ways, though it's still a complex project to implement and can be done more quickly. As you see on this map here, this is the stage that goes from Bury Town Centre, Bury Interchange with trams and buses, going all the way to Bromley Cross, which is a train station on the Northern Network in Bolton. It doesn't take the most direct route that you typically have for an active travel route. Rather, it follows interesting paths of different levels of accessibility, linking it interesting features along the way. So we have a country park here, we have a hilltop viewpoint, we have an old village with a lovely pub and a Roman road going through it, country park and so on. It does, however, include accessible sections without being fully accessible overall. We're very conscious of that. So for example, what we did with the trail is to promote 10 shorter routes, one in each borough, so that anyone can sample the trail, and 5 of those are totally step-free. The one on this map here to the bottom right, I can't actually see it because of the way the screen's laid out. Oh yeah, going up from Bury, it uses National Cycle Network route number 6 and uses a sort of there and back and then a circular route from Bury Town Centre to Burrs Country Park. So active travel and accessibility are both very important in it, and certainly in the town centres, active travel schemes can be very useful in getting people on and off the trail. It takes account of users' needs, or a good trail should take account of needs for public transport and other amenities. I would say that the GM Ringway does this to a probably unique degree of any trail in Britain or possibly even Europe, in the sense that it was designed specifically to start from each stage, starting and finishing, as we've mentioned, at a public transport node. Other projects that I've consulted on as well, we've taken that very much into account to encourage environmental benefits and usage. As mentioned as well, it benefits from but doesn't rely on active travel use routes. Just going to the next slide now. Yeah, so we got fantastic results and feedback during implementation. You can see one of the community walks that we led there. We used an app to basically promote the walk, as well as leading independent walks as well, which has been very well taken up. The very popular Go Jauntly app, which is very suitable for non-map readers, non-expert walkers as well. And we got fantastic numbers of users and mileage walked during the sort of implementation period. Just as an example of one of the feedback, we had this lovely couple from North Manchester who not so long ago contacted us and really explained how the trail has made an impact on their lives. Just read what they've written here. We've lived in Greater Manchester all our lives and we didn't realise that our local area was so beautiful. So many hidden gems we hadn't even heard of. We learnt much about local history, got much fitter. But importantly for transport, we used public transport throughout. We used to drive everywhere, so our habits have forever changed, thanks to the GM Ringway. And it was partly on the basis of that and other anecdotal evidence that Nick and I wanted to conduct this research a bit more formally to find out more about the impacts on users and how that's affected their travel habits, their connection with nature and other factors. Over to you, Nick.
Okay, yeah, so really to kind of outline what the methods are, we're pretty much giving you the first stage here, which is the survey, and we're planning to do interviews as well to drill down, and also quite a lot of analysis. But what we've got to play with are around 541 responses. All of the people who have responded to the survey are trail users, so that's a kind of a caveat. You'll see some of the findings actually relate to that in a second. And we've got a lot of people who are happy to take part in those interviews too. So once we do some more analysis, we'll start to think about the questions that we want to be asking them. We're kind of interested in how they use the trail, how much they walk and wheel and cycle anyway, and also on the trail, what it's done in terms of the benefits for their health and for nature, connecting to nature, but also understanding Greater Manchester as well. Quite importantly as well, we have a lot of data on postcodes and things that we can use to really make a much deeper analysis on. Can we go to the next slide, Andrew?
We can, but it's just worth mentioning that that one slide bottom right about how the public transport integration has made a difference.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we're going to show you some modes in a second, but overall, for the main mode that people use, you can see the blue part of the pie there is it's overwhelmingly public transport, and maybe about a quarter are using cars to access parts of the trail as their main mode. We also were able to ask them as well any mode that they use too. So I can give you a bit more detail on that in a second.
Yeah, cool. Shall I jump onto the next slide, Nick?
Yeah. I think we're just going to keep chipping in now, aren't we, on the
Yeah.
results? So yeah, first of all, just to really kind of outline the impact of the trail on people's habits in terms of whether it's helped them to walk more or cycle or wheel more for leisure. Whether it's done the same but for everyday purposes, such as going for work or shopping. That's the top right. Bottom left is whether or not they use public transport now more for leisure after using the trail, and bottom right is whether they use public transport more for everyday purposes. They've been giving results on a 5-point Likert scale, so the positive answers are the most positive answers are on the left, the blue ones, and the least positive on the right, the yellow ones. So really, just to summarize, you'll see that in all cases the middle one is the highest, but that's really because we're asking people who are already quite serious walkers, or many of them are quite serious walkers. But what we're interested in here is that actually there's a lot of positivity in terms of people, actually quite a few of them walking more for leisure anyway, since using the trail, but particularly in the bottom left, there's quite a few here that are actually now using public transport more for leisure. And even on the bottom right, more using it for everyday purposes. What we can do with this is a really kind of high level analysis, but what we can do is we can actually start to look at these different segments and drill down in the analysis and try and understand more about them, more about some of the reasons why they've done this more, and then obviously the interviews can help with us being able to understand some of the different people who've actually used the trail and their journey really towards maybe more sustainable travel or more walking and cycling generally. So next one, Andrew, unless you want to say anything about this.
Yeah, so I'll just go back to that previous one. I just think it's worth pointing out that this is interesting because we have about 80% of people who are fairly active already based on another question that we asked. But even so, we now see that, as you can see, bottom left, a total of, something like 40% of those people are actually now using public transport more for leisure. This makes a real difference practically. I know so many walking groups that often would organise walks, guided walks by car, for example, car share, that kind of thing. With a trail like this, if you show them that public transport is possible, it's not quite build it, it's more like show them and people will use it rather than build it and people will use it. We can see that then, 40% of people are actually then using public transport more to get out to leisure and heritage opportunities.
Yeah,
Good,
and exactly, Andrew, and to speak more to that point as well about lots of walking groups, lots of organised walks, lots of people going for recreational walks. If you think about the carbon that's used for going for those walks, if there's many people doing that in cars, and you can replace that by public transport, it's got a really key impact, which can add to all of the shorter trips, car trips that can be replaced just for work and that kind of thing. Next one anyway, Andrew.
Sorry.
So these ones, again, interviews and deeper analysis will give us a bit more on these, but overwhelmingly positive for physical health, for mental health, for connection to nature, and maybe most interestingly is the bottom right one, because it's explaining that this trail has actually given people a chance to see Greater Manchester, to improve their understanding of the place. It'll be really interesting to go into the data and see about where these people live and whether they're residents or visitors, for instance. But yeah, a lot of interesting impacts of the trail.
Just to add to that, just from anecdotal evidence, we've had so many bits of feedback saying, I didn't know this place existed, even if it's just about a mile or two from where people live. Also, like finding places on the other side of Greater Manchester. Even the Nature Connection one's kind of important. I'm also in something called the Nature Connection Network, a sort of semi-academic research panel. And nature connection locally is so important, and I suppose the point is here it's enhanced people's connection to nature very significantly. About 90% of people said this, 80% of people said this, but the point is all of that nature is within, or at least on the borders of Greater Manchester, so it's really connecting people to nature locally, which is a really key impact that we want to see nowadays. Obviously, just go to the next one.
Next one. On this one you can see top left are the number of stages that people have done on the trail, starting with one in blue and then multiple stages in orange, which you can see many of them have walked multiple stages, and then in green the whole trail. That's still quite a lot. So again, we can be interested in finding out more about their journey on the trail, and even if they've only walked one stage, whether or not that's actually led to more public transport use. On the top right is the thing that I alluded to before, which is where we asked them about their mode to access the trail. In this case, we asked them about the mode, any mode that they use. So if they use multiple modes to reach the trail, for instance. On the first three on the left are train, tram and bus. So you can see that they're obviously more used than any of the other modes, kind of backing up what we saw on the main mode. The next two is car as a driver and car as a passenger. Again, there's still quite a few, but I would say, not knowing it completely, but many other trails are probably more likely to have more people accessing them by a car, especially linear trails quite often, or linear walks can involve even more than one car, with people driving to one end and then picking up people from the other end. Even some in the light blue were using taxis as well, and some on foot too. Bottom left there is just again reinforcing what Andrew was talking about there, about nature being really important, a really important part of the trail, and people being able to use it to access those opportunities. The bottom right is actually a word cloud based on some of the open comments. We asked them about what the trail had done for them, but also some of the challenges. Without a really deep analysis, you can see words like cancelled and lost and walked and accessible. And I think really, if you could summarize these, there's quite a lot on the reliability of transport. It certainly, I think we would see it's in certain parts of the trail rather than all the way around. But again, those open comments are going to be a real goldmine when we actually go into them and do a deep dive.
Just add one thing on there. The bottom left one, I think there's a really, this really shows an important environmental benefit of having a local trail here. Question specifically was, using the GM Ringway trail has shown me I don't have to travel far to enjoy nature, heritage and leisure opportunities. Again, we've got absolutely massive, overwhelming responses there, about 90% positive, almost 90% positive responses agreeing or strongly agreeing with that. What that means is that people are then realising that they can actually stay within the city region of Greater Manchester to actually access these things rather than driving out. Typically, you speak to so many people based here who say, oh, I'm going to the Peak District or I'm going to Snowdonia for some leisure or going to the seaside, you know, in neighbouring counties, that kind of thing. And with the local trail, if you highlight nice places to visit, you can actually get them in a low impact way, staying more local, keeping more spend here, and not travelling as far. And obviously that has big environmental benefits as well.
Yeah.
So Nick, over to you.
Yeah, really just to round off, isn't it, really? Yeah, just to say, as we kind of mentioned, we're on the start of the journey in terms of analysing the data. We'll have a lot more to report soon, and if you're interested, please you know, stay in touch. Hopefully we can come back at some point and present here as well. But yeah, we really want to go into this qualitative research now, do a bit of a deep dive on the quants, understand some of the relationships, perhaps some of the actual users, some of the groups of people that are maybe using it more or less, or whether they face challenges, how that actually relates to their practices in terms of travel and using public transport or being more sustainable. And because we have these wonderful people who seem to want to do more research and do interviews for us, I feel like we can take this further and do more longitudinal studies on this and understand over time the impacts of the trail. Yeah, Andrew, anything to add there?
Yeah, just to basically sum up at the end, this is my final slide, just the benefits of leisure trails, summing up some of the things that we've talked about. And also just with the pictures on the right, we show it other regions are seeing as well. We have the London Loop that already existed, which I didn't know about, and there's Capital Ring as well, which exists as well. I personally think it's under promoted in Greater London. I think more could be done with it. And it's also fairly accessible by public transport. Not quite so closely integrated, but it's, you know, it's a very useful model that when we learnt about it, we looked at. West Midlands Walking Trail, this was initiated by former Mayor Andy Street a few years ago. I acted as a consultant with Nick and other people's help on advising them on further implementation aspects. And hopefully that will be taken forward. And in East Midlands County, for example, the new county region, Mayor Claire Ward has also instigated a new trail called the just term the Loop at the moment, which they also see as having multiple benefits. Liverpool City Region as well. My former colleagues at CPRE, the Countryside Charity, are working now with Liverpool City Region to help develop I think it's a walking and cycling trail there as well. But the benefits, yeah, it can help unify and build the identity of the region. We have lots of these new devolved regions sort of being formed and coming together, and creating a trail that can be one thing that unites the people, that helps build the identity of the region. You can obviously boost participation in walking, wheeling and cycling among diverse communities. That's hard for the trail itself to do, but working with physical activity partnerships and so on, and other community groups, that can be done. Lots of environmental benefits, as we've sort of implied, promoting intermodal travel where people access leisure opportunities using public transport. And also even just people visiting places. There are two big National Trust sites on the route of the GM Ringway, Dunham Massey and Lyme Park, both have millions of visitors per year. And we're actually bringing visitors to those places on foot and using public transport, which again has benefits in its own right. And of course, the benefit of not travelling so far to reach leisure and heritage opportunities. We have boosting the local economy, and we did that as part of the project, promoting lots of local businesses along the route, especially in the hospitality and heritage sectors, and also generally for sort of council leaders, mayors, that kind of thing. Lots of stuff about active travel in the environment is controversial nowadays, but a trail like this has all of these benefits, but it's uncontroversial. People can get behind it, people can support it. Yeah, and that's about it, really. That's mine and Nick's contact details if anyone wants to get in touch for further details. Great. So, Robin, we're done.
Great. Yes, I was just reaching for the mute button, unmute button. Thank you very much, Andrew, Nick. That was really interesting. Interesting to see how yeah, a trail based on existing trails has sparked such activity around Manchester. And lots of learnings there, and yeah, I can see by the icons going up that people really enjoyed that. Just to check, your role has mainly been in the research behind it, not in the initial creation of the trail, is that right? Or were you involved in its creation in the first place?
I am the person who actually had the crazy idea in the first place, sort of led it
okay,
forward
right,
in quite an entrepreneurial way, and then working with the charities then helped lead the implementation of it.
Right.
So, and basically by doing that, I became a consultant in this field because I realized there was a real gap in the market for people that know specifically about leisure walking and cycling.
Yeah, I'm with you. And please, to the audience, put questions in the Q&A. I will come to those in a second. I know Marcus put one in there already. One question for you to start with. In doing this, did you identify any particular infrastructure needs? I know the aim was to use existing paths that were there, footpaths and existing other trails, I'm sure. But were there any examples of things that you thought, a little bit of an extra path here, or maybe an improvement would open something up?
I tell you one thing that is very relevant for active travel generally, but also was very relevant for the trail. And I had some feedback from people behind the London Loop that have said similar things. Road crossings. When you come to a major road, this can be really difficult, for leisure walkers or ordinary users. There's a big road that anyone in the Northwest will know about called the A580, the East Lancs Road. And it was kind of a prototype motorway between Manchester and Liverpool that was built before the main motorway network. And because of that, there weren't good road crossings put into place on it. So there is one particular place in Wigan Borough where people have to cross at quite a difficult spot, really. We basically had to change the route to find the easiest spot, but it's still not ideal. We do warn people about that on the website, the app, that kind of thing. So I'd say road crossing is one of the main things. Also elsewhere that can happen as well, but that was one of the main places. Infrastructure generally, it was a matter of really auditing the paths carefully. So although they're not to LTN 120 standards or anything like that, some of the paths are obviously, everything had to be checked carefully to see it was as usable and maintainable as possible. Maintenance duties generally lie with the local authority, or in some cases big landowners like National Trust. But even so, we had to work with them to identify the best paths that could be used, and sort of often aim for a compromise between getting you to a nice destination but also using a path that is usable. There are impacts from flooding and things. We've had big impacts in the south of Manchester and Stockport over the last year with flooding, and Environment Agency's been doing work on that, which will benefit the trail hopefully long term.
Right. And you mentioned that there are some sections which are more inclusive than others. And Sally, who has joined us, I'm glad to say, has got a question about that. If mobility issues vary a great deal, and so if I had mobility issues, how do I find out about which pieces are suitable for me? Is there a website and it describes
the approach that we took with that, I'd worked on a previous project for GM Moving, the activity promotion people, on creating short health walks in different parts of Greater Manchester. That was sort of during the lockdown period. And I worked with a disability expert then, which was very useful. So the approach that we took with the GM Ringway, we kind of focused more on inclusivity rather than accessibility. If you're aiming for full accessibility, it's just impossible with this kind of route. You have to admit that. I think no trail anywhere in the country or possibly even in the world can claim to be fully accessible in say LTN 120 standards, that kind of thing. So we were aiming sort of more for inclusivity, and the way that we did that is we identified step-free sections, list those clearly on the website, but also, as we've mentioned, 5 shorter walks as well, including 5 step-free walks that people can sample with. We'd like to, if funding allows, expect the team there who's looking after the GM Ringway now would like to expand that network of sort of step-free routes. The other thing that we did as well, and this is a key point, is, as you mentioned, Robin, people have different mobility needs. People with visual impairments have different ones. People, all sorts of different, hearing impairments, all that kind of thing. The approach that we took, guided by my colleague Ben Andrews, who's a local Greater Manchester-based consultant on inclusive activity, was to basically describe the trail so that people can make their own decisions about its accessibility for them. So what that meant is, on the app, we state, for example, we're going over now, say, tactile paving when you're crossing a road, talk about whether there are push button crossings there. We talk about whether a section will have an unfenced drop to one side that might cause visual impaired people problems, type of surfaces being used, that kind of thing. It's impossible to do that fully on a 200-mile route, but that was generally the approach that we took. Give people the information, allow them to make their own decisions. And one demographic finding that we got from the survey is that 20% of the people who responded that was still had the positive results, they do class themselves as having either a disability or long-term health condition. So we do seem to be reaching the audience.
Okay, that's really good. And actually, as I look through the chat, there's and the Q&A, there's a couple of people who've raised questions about inclusivity and diversity and accessibility. So you've answered a few of the questions around that as well. Mark, you've got your hand up. You put a question in the Q&A as well. You're welcome to ask it live.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I've been working obviously with Sustrans. You don't know me, but I've been working with Sustrans and now as a consultant for 20 years. But two things spring to mind. One is that there's a distinction between the named routes, which are just assembled bits of routes that are already there, and so designated routes, long distance paths, whether they're national trails or whatever, which people go to because they have a name and a brand, but they may actually be worse than non-named paths that are actually better. So there is the risk of attracting people to stuff by giving it a name, like the Ringway, that stuff that isn't as good as stuff that doesn't have a name. And my point about, which I always got hit over the head with Sustrans, is, aren't you just attracting people to drive to? Your slides are quite interesting because they seem to show that isn't the case. But the national trails, I see that we've got Zolt on here and he might have some views from his previous work. But national trails, a lot of people will drive, even here in Brighton, where you've got bus routes going out to the South Downs Way, but people will drive to walk 3, 4, 10 miles on the South Downs Way. So there is a risk of attracting more carbon to it. And I just wanted your crossings. Bob will remember this. 30 years ago, the Ramblers did a report called "You're Either Quick or Dead," which looked at crossings of major roads and highlighted that there were problems crossing major roads. That was 30 years ago. And I don't think much has improved. Some things have, but that phrase, is still going to be relevant to a lot of footpath crossings of trunk roads.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to respond on that, Mark, but yeah, road crossings is a real issue, and I guess some of the problem is that some of the trunk roads are in less built up, sometimes semi-rural areas, or on the edge of a developed area, and it means then that the councils have little incentive based on numbers, local residents, that kind of thing, to actually improve the crossings there. It's not their fault necessarily. They might be willing to do that, but obviously it's a matter of priorities, funding priorities. So they're more likely to do that in a sort of more built up urban area. So it's just a fundamental challenge that's there as well. But yes, I think definitely when you're planning this kind of thing, if it's a named trail or not, if you take into account public transport integration, that can make a real difference. I worked on another project in Cumbria recently, in a very, very rural area, and it was very, very hard to plan things out so that people could actually use the trail without driving, because public transport was so limited there. I know Nick has worked separately on other projects about rural bus use, not to do with this project, and basically ensuring that opportunities are there even in rural and semi-rural areas. It will make a real difference. They're often just not promoted strongly enough as well. This isn't to do with the GM Ringway. The things that I've seen elsewhere as a walker, you can find things, but people just don't know about what public transport opportunities there are.
Yeah, I'll also say the name is going to happen, isn't it? People are people are going to want to conquer a certain trail because it's got a name like the Pennine Way, for instance, or something like that. But I think the way that Andrew's done it is he, from the start of branding the trail, he's actually put public transport in at the very centre, and all of the information relates to how you actually get there by public transport. And I think that that's probably reflected in the results that we've got so far, but we can definitely ask more questions when we do further analysis and further interviews, and try and understand that more, because you're looking at people's kind of what do they actually want to do? Do they want to go and walk and complete a trail? Is that their motivation, or is their motivation to be sustainable whilst they're doing it? And there's a lot of competing things there.
Yes, it's interesting. It's like there may be a motivation for starting, but then by its nature, you might have directed them in a particular way by putting buses and trams, the public transport, as here's the way to do it now. I think
yeah, which is just one other thing is that when you go to stations now, you see quite a lot of leaflets for the walks that you can do from the station, and they're very deliberately designed around doing one way by foot and then the other way back by train. So I think Andrew might be able to confirm, but I think Manchester Victoria might have done something with the trail.
Yeah, we've had really good support, particularly through the community rail partnerships recently. So now I think all but one of the northern trains run stations on the route. We now have signage there, which is paid for by the Community Rail Trust, which is brilliant. We also have digital display panels at Manchester Victoria, one of the two major terminals there, hopefully soon at Piccadilly as well. So yeah, working with the transport operators will be great, and we're hoping to talk more to TfGM shortly to see how they can help promote the trail, as lots of people are using their routes to access it, as we can see.
Okay, I'm gonna come. Let's do Kate's questions. She's got a hand up, keen to ask it in person. Then we'll come to Beth from the National Trust, who's she's also got a question on diversity and inclusion, but I think it's a slightly broader version of the one you answered a minute ago. So we'll come to Beth in a minute. Kate first.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I think it's a really good point around crossings on high-speed routes, and that tricky thing around is something better than nothing. There is no correct answer to that question. You know, it is tricky. Just reflecting, we raised it. I was involved in the CIHT guidance on the safe system, which looks at, you know, inherently is something safe or not. And we gave examples of things that we considered were not inherently safe. For example, an uncontrolled priority T-junction onto a 60 or 70 mile an hour road, single dual carriageway. Inherently, the speed of impact of a side impact at a junction like that, and similarly, the same issue of pedestrian running across the road, it's inherently not a survivable injury. You know, there's a strong potential for high severity injury. National Highways kicked back really hard against that, and they essentially said, moving people, I'm paraphrasing unkindly slightly, and I'd do it if the relevant people were in the room, moving people is more important than getting them there safely. That's pretty much what they said. So I'm just interested in whether that came up locally, and also reflecting, Rob mentioned the road safety strategy, which is imminent. We've encouraged the government, we are CIHT, so I chair the Learned Society Board of CIHT, and I'm going to be president from June coming, and my theme will be transport inequality, and I'll be making a big deal around user group inequality by age, by disability, by faith, by ethnicity, by, you know, all the dimensions, lots of which interconnect with pedestrian cyclists. So if anyone's got any points they want to raise, flag it, but be aware, Manual for Streets is coming really fast. I can't disclose what's in it now because obviously that's confidential, but I couldn't decide whether to throw it on a bonfire or throw myself on a bonfire when I read it. But the team involved are committed to making it better. At the moment, we should be worried about its walking, cycling provision. So if there'll be a draft for consultation, or whether it just comes out as a final document, I don't know. If I do get to hear anything, I will flag it to you, because this group will be really well placed to input to that. But I think, and I'm interested in whether in Manchester you had any of those, is something better than nothing? Where did you go with that? and just everybody bear that in. Both the strategy and the manual for streets are going to be really important documents for us as a group.
I think I'll answer a bit about that, because I've actually asked a question myself about this at one of the Active Travel conferences. I think it was Active City in York last year. It's not a sort of answer directly to the question about GM Ringway. It's more just about sort of what the active travel community and what planners might consider generally. My question was, in answer to your question was, are these routes, are paths which won't be LTN 120 standard, but are perfectly usable by lots and lots of users, including even people with disabilities to a large degree. What do we do with those? Should they be promoted? Especially from the point of view of, there's lots of talk nowadays about an active travel network. Whereas obviously lots of the implementations you see, even in the forward-looking boroughs and local authorities, are on very small-scale schemes. Expensive but small-scale schemes, very useful locally, sometimes useful for visitors from other parts of the region or city or that kind of thing. But they don't make up a whole network. And I guess one thing that looking at something like the GM Ringway shows is, by using paths that are good enough, you can put together a kind of network that people will use. It could have been done. We could have taken a totally different approach to the project and used not fully LTN 120 standards, but looking at paths that were more step-free or more barrier-free than the ones that we had. But by doing that, we wouldn't have been able to bring people to the really beautiful spots that we have, the leisure sites, the heritage sites, and all of that kind of thing. And at the end of the day, it was designed to be a leisure and heritage sort of walking trail. So we had to make that big compromise, sort of following the lead in a way, but modifying it as much as we could from other trails that have been established. And then trying to mitigate it with identifying step-free sections, promote step-free routes, that kind of thing. But I think there's just a sort of a balance there. And in my view, to be honest, I think the active travel community and professionals are missing opportunities with paths that don't meet LTN 120 standard to do something with those and promote those. That's my feeling about that.
I agree. And sometimes once we do something, that can be a leverage to do something that's better. This great being the enemy of the good and all of that. I think it's a good point. There's a danger of saying, if we can't make it perfect, we won't do anything. Well, if people are already crossing there, well, let's do something that makes it better. Not misleading people is important, not implying it's not, but there aren't many people who are going to think, an uncontrolled crossing is safe that they don't know. That's helpful. Thank you very much.
Yes. Quite. Thanks very much, Kate. And there's a standing invitation for you to come and give us a talk here when you take up your position at CA.
Thank you. I'd love to. Well, what I could maybe test drive is, I'm writing a book around transport medical analogies. So what we had in the Manual for Streets discussion, essentially in the statement. I know it's not as good as you think it needs to be, or we think it is, but it's just got to meet this timetable, so it's going to happen. The medical analogy I gave, if your cardiac consultant said, we're going to do the operation, it's not really the right one for you, but we can do it on Tuesday. But if you want the right operation, it's going to be 3 weeks' time. We all know which we choose. So if anybody would like a test drive of what some medical transport analogies look like, and also I'm collating a list of transport inequality examples. Maybe I could do a kind of test drive of them with you beforehand, because I'll have a number of events while I'll be presenting, like awards and at the AGM, and the CIT luncheon's a big one, which is obviously crazy in scale, many tens of thousands of people, 1852 people, 1,852 people, I think. It's an opportunity I do not want to miss. And I'd like this group to feed input.
I think transport inequality would be a great topic.
No one's done it, to my surprise. People have sort of touched on it sort of peripherally. No one's majored on road safety. Wow. I don't want to just be road safety, because you get the whatabouters. I think transport inequality speaks to everybody's interest a little bit better. So anyone's got any thoughts? Kate.carpenter@jacobs.com. Apologies, I need to leave because I'm in a committee meeting shortly, but been brilliant, and
okay,
all of anything I can do. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Let's actually, we're going to carry on that theme, because Beth, we've got two Beths on. Beth from National Trust has a question about inequality, which is specifically to do with it's diversity and inclusion, which you've included in terms of the walking. Her question was more in terms of access to nature. I don't know if you want to clarify the question any more than that, Beth. You're welcome to do so.
Yeah, no problem. I'm currently working in the National Trust in the Greater Manchester urban area, so it's been really great to hear what's been going on with the Ringway. Really good to hear that nature connection as well was part of the evaluation, because that's something that's obviously really key at the moment, but also very kind of inaccessible to a lot of communities. And obviously you're going through 10 boroughs. There's so many different towns, communities, really diverse. And I was just wondering how you kind of view that in terms of the way the Ringway is going to develop. You mentioned a bit about charities and working in partnership to kind of tackle some of those issues, but I just wondered if you could talk a bit more on that.
Sorry, could you just clarify that a bit, Beth? Sorry, I didn't quite understand about just repeat the question, sorry.
So obviously the Ringway is going through 10 boroughs, all very diverse. There's a massive unequal access to nature. You mentioned as well that in a lot of the people that you talk to in your surveys are generally experienced walkers and they use trails already. That's also a really quite undiverse demographic. So I was just wondering what's your view on that, and are there ways that you're looking to make it a more being used by more inclusive amount of users? Yeah.
It's a real big challenge for this whole kind of project, outdoor access, heritage access, all that kind of thing, as you well know at National Trust. I know you've done good work on it, nationally at National Trust. It's very hard for people. What's happening now with the GM Ringway, just to clarify, is after the implementation, we had about 300,000 to implement it over 2 years. Since then, we've handed it over to a charity that's currently being formed called the GM Ringway Association. We're kind of modelling what we're doing on the Southwest Coast Path Association. That's the best example of a trail-oriented charity. They run things really well with the Southwest Coast Path. I'm not a trustee of the new charity, but I am involved in advising them, keeping an eye on things, all that kind of thing, supporting volunteers. What we've recently had a workshop with GM Moving that is very, very focused on inequalities, health inequalities, nature access inequalities, that kind of thing. And it's a real challenge. In a way, I think we have to hold our hands up and say it's something that as a trail, it will be a very small based charity, no funding at all as of yet. We kind of can't do it on our own. We can work with potentially, especially if when the charity does get funding, to possibly take employees on and that kind of thing. A community engagement officer would be fantastic, but it would very much, even during implementation, we did lots of the outreach work and activation work by working in contact with other partners. I led Manchester Muslim Walkers Group for a local men's mental health charity as well, which was much more inclusive. There were certain partner events. There's something called We Invented the Weekend in Salford, and it just so happened the trail was right on the route there. So over 2 or 3 years, we ran events there, and they had a very successful outreach with much more resources, albeit for only a weekend project, than we could have. And again, they got much more diverse audiences coming onto that in all sorts of ways. But basically, for a trail, it's something that we can't do. Other projects that I'm involved in, we're looking at that. I'm currently working with Steve Connor on the Scion Lines project in Greater Manchester, and they're a key focus is to work with local partners, local community groups, and the routes there will be different because they will be more urban. They will involve bringing people into green and blue spaces much closer in built-up areas than what most of the GM Ringway Trail does. In a way, the GM Ringway Trail gives people access to natural areas, green areas and blue areas, slightly out of the urban centres, even though they can access them from the urban centres using public transport or by walking from some of the urban centres. But the goals aren't quite the same as there's lots and lots of funding, and which is good, going into boosting local nature access either by creating new green spaces or engaging people with those. I totally support that, but it's not something the trail itself could do. But
we might be able to look into some of the respondents as well. So just thinking about what Beth said about it's not, we have got a data set and they are all trail users. They have used the trail at least once, but maybe we can understand some of those people if they did have a pathway from something that could be relatively, it wasn't very inclusive. They were in a situation where it was hard for them to get to nature. That's something that we could ask them and we could understand about how to get over those barriers.
Yeah, or maybe there's the walking equivalent of community cycle clubs, or I mean, yeah, we have in Oxford Black Women Bike, there are lots of initiatives. There are walking ones too. The Ramblers do ones, local promotion, and yeah, there are things that can be done.
I think we actually targeted the trail at some of those groups. Targeted the survey at some of those groups as well. Some of those local groups in Manchester. So
yeah, good. Dave, you've put your hand up.
Just a quick one. Have you had any debates about an interest in public safety issues, which are quite varied, obviously, by gender and things like that. But also there are some areas that some people in a city won't want to go to without some sort of support. And you get groups like Muslim hikers and brothers on bikes from the Muslim community. And part of that reason, I think, is you don't want to turn up at places where you'll be the only person from your background. I wonder if that's been an issue for you. And certainly in Birmingham, there's great worries about being out on the canal at dusk or going through some of our lovely parks at dusk as well. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, Andrew. I was just literally going to say that we've not gone into the data deep enough. Well, I haven't anyway to see if anything's come out, but it's certainly something that I've experienced in previous research, that actually the feelings of safety are not even across everyone in terms of where people walk. So that's really important. So I don't know, Andrew, if anything's been discussed particularly.
Not really. It's a big issue in Greater Manchester at the moment. There has been lots of work on it, but for us, in a way, we sort of almost had to create the trail. We were aware of, like, if a part of the trail seemed to go through an area where antisocial behaviour was common, we would look at alternative routes instead. There was one bit, I just remember being out with a female friend one time, and we were walking part of the trail into Wigan town centre, and it's a lovely green artery using the River Douglas that comes almost right into the town centre. So we used that, and she said she felt slightly scared. She said she wouldn't feel comfortable because there were groups of youths, as we sometimes say, sort of hanging around there. At the same time, however, there were several single females who were walking their dogs or walking individually around there, perhaps based more locally, who felt quite comfortable doing that. So again, it's a sort of matter of perception, that kind of thing. I think the point that you made before, Nick, is about another, and you've also made, Dave, just about groups and stuff like that. Is really, really important. What was sad recently is I've done lots with South Manchester Muslim walkers. I've led walks with them. They've walked the whole GM Ringway. They're generally sort of quite a posh group, to be honest, quite middle class demographics. So they're not reaching some of the audiences, despite their name, that you might think they are. But when there was trouble recently after various things happened, they actually cancelled some of their walks in North Manchester because they felt they'd have a bad feeling and would get a bad reception in walking in certain areas. So I think these different audiences, they are affected by this more than we realise, more than some of us who might not be affected. So I think certainly going forward with this kind of project, working with cycling, walking groups that are targeted at those different communities, either specifically for them or have already successfully involved those people, can be good as well. And also to work with neighbourhood groups that aren't specifically focused on walking and cycling. I think the active travel activists do this a lot already when they're working on active travel schemes, particularly in urban areas. They'll try and engage. Very good examples, Levenshulme in South Manchester, where they've done that, Levenshulme, working with local community groups that aren't involved in walking and cycling, but getting their views on schemes and how people can get involved. And there's been some really good successes there.
Great. And I'll just round this up with saying we've had a number of other examples, a few other examples. Dundee, of course, London you mentioned, Colchester, Birmingham. Wool has put a couple of notes in the Q&A about Colchester. the Colchester Orbital Walk, started by a woman called Rowena 17 years ago. And I think there's something about these routes because they're using existing infrastructure, that they're not hugely expensive, and yet they can bring large benefits to the area in terms of physical health, and potentially I can see how you can sell them to the council in terms of both health and economic benefits as well, which might make them relatively easy to lodge into the realm of implementability fairly easily. So that's really good. It's been really interesting hearing about that. I don't know if Will wants to talk a little bit about Colchester, but that sounded a good example. He's put a link about it, walkcolchester.org.uk, in the chat.
Hello there, Robin. Yes, basically I wanted to mention that we got ours going, or Rowena got ours going, by getting into the local plan 17 years ago, and it was taken up from there by Colchester's superb active travel team. It's not as advanced as Manchester's because we don't have the public transport interchanges, but we could start looking at putting the bus routes on the map and things like that. But if anyone is thinking of this and you're having your local plan consulted on at the moment, please get it in there, even if it's just the idea, and then add details later, because once it's in there, you start getting money from Section 106, CIL, and everything like that. So, you know, it's worth doing.
Right, that is a top tip. Local plans. Thank you, Will. Okay, in which case I will round it up there. I don't know, Andrew, Nick, anything you wanted to round off on? I think you've done your job very effectively.
Just thank you for the opportunity.
Just say thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, but thank you very much for coming along and giving us that great
Robin,
presentation.
sorry, just one question. Could you capture the chat? Because I think there's some really useful links in there afterwards.
Yes. Yeah, Zoom will save it, and we'll email it across to you. And I will say that next week we have Kay Ingle from the Wheels for Wellbeing. She's their campaigns and policy manager, and she'll be talking about the 5th edition of the Guide to Inclusive Cycling, which is a really great handbook for inclusive cycling. So very much ties into the inclusive transport. It is cycling focused, but it talks about cycling as a mobility aid. It's a fantastic reference document that I've been using for several years. And Wheels for Wellbeing, a fantastic organisation. So that's a talk I'm very much looking forward to watching, rather than somebody else's turn to compare next week. So have a great week in the interim, and walk, wiggle and cycle safely in this cold snap we're having, and enjoy the week. Bye for now.